What happens when two of the most outspoken women in media sit down for what was supposed to be a friendly chat, but instead becomes the most uncomfortable television moment of the year? The cameras were rolling, the audience was packed, and nobody, absolutely nobody, was prepared for what unfolded when Whoopi Goldberg asked the one question that Meghan Markle refused to answer. Before we get into this absolute chaos, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me whose side you're on. Because trust me, you're going to need to pick one. Now let's get into what actually went down. The studio lights were blazing hot as Meghan Markle walked onto the set with that practiced smile we've all seen 1,000 times. The audience erupted in applause, and Whoopi Goldberg stood up from her chair at the table, arms spread wide in welcome. It seemed like the perfect setup. Two women who had both faced their share of public scrutiny, both known for speaking their minds, sitting down for what the producers had billed as an honest conversation about resilience, media treatment, and finding your voice. The other co-hosts smiled politely, but you could already sense something in the air. Maybe it was the way Meghan's smile didn't quite reach her eyes, or the way Whoopi's greeting seemed just a touch too formal. Too measured, they sat down. The applause died away, and Whoopi jumped right in. No warm-up questions, no soft landing. She leaned forward, fingers interlaced on the table, and said, "So, let's talk about truth, because that's what you say you value most, right? Truth, authenticity, being able to tell your own story." Meghan nodded, her posture perfect, hands folded gracefully in her lap. "Absolutely," she replied, her voice steady. "I think for too long, other people have controlled the narrative about my life, and I've finally reached a point where I need to reclaim that." Whoopi nodded slowly, but there was something in her expression that should have been a warning sign. "That's interesting," she said, "because I've been in this industry for over 40 years, and one thing I've learned is that truth is a tricky thing. Sometimes what we call our truth is really just our perspective, and perspectives can be, well, they can be incomplete." The audience shifted in their seats. This wasn't the softball interview they'd expected. Meghan's smile tightened just slightly at the corners. "I'm not sure I understand what you're implying," she said, her tone still controlled, but with an edge creeping in. Whoopi sat back in her chair, and that's when you could see she wasn't backing down. "I'm not implying anything, I'm saying it directly. You've done several interviews now, told your story, talked about how you were treated, the struggles you faced, and I'm not dismissing any of that. I'm really not. But here's my question, and I think it's a fair one. At what point do you take responsibility for your own choices? You walked into a situation with your eyes open. You knew what that family was. You knew what the media would be like. You knew the pressure that would come. So when do we stop acting like you were some naive girl who got blindsided?" The air in the studio went completely still. Meghan's face flushed, and you could see her fighting to maintain composure. Her hands, which had been resting calmly, now gripped the edge of her chair. That's actually incredibly dismissive of everything I went through," she said, her voice rising slightly. "You're suggesting that, because I knew it would be difficult, I somehow deserved the treatment I received. That the racism, the lies, the complete lack of protection, that was all just something I should have expected and accepted." Whoopi held up a hand. "I didn't say deserved. Don't put words in my mouth. I'm saying there's a difference between being victimized and playing the victim, and I think you're smart enough to know that difference." One of the other co-hosts tried to jump in, clearly hoping to redirect the conversation, but Whoopi kept going. "You had resources, Meghan. You had money, you had lawyers, you had options. You could have left quietly, worked things out privately. Instead, every few months there's another interview, another documentary, another opportunity to tell us how wronged you were. At some point, people start to wonder if you're actually looking for healing, or if you're looking for attention." Meghan's composure cracked. Her voice went sharp, cutting through the studio. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You sit here on your platform, protected by your status, your decades in the industry, and you dare to question how I chose to handle an impossible situation. I was drowning, Whoopi. I was contemplating ending my own life, and the institution I had married into did nothing. They left me to suffer in silence, so forgive me if I don't think your judgment is particularly valuable right now." The audience gasped. This had gone from uncomfortable to absolutely explosive. Whoopi didn't flinch, though. She leaned forward again, her voice dropping lower but somehow more intense. and I am truly sorry that you experienced that pain. I really am. Mental health struggles are real, and they matter. But you're conflating two different things here. You can be genuinely hurt and still be making choices about how you respond to that hurt. You chose to go on international television. You chose to do it with specific media personalities known for sympathetic coverage. You chose to make allegations without providing evidence. You chose to do all of this while still using the titles and the platform that came from the very institution you say abused you. So yes, I'm questioning the consistency there. Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This interview is over, she announced. I came here thinking we could have an actual conversation about the real issues women face when they try to speak up. But clearly you've already made up your mind about who I am and what my motivations are. Whoopi remained seated, eerily calm. See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. The moment someone challenges you, really challenges you, you shut it down. You walk away. That's not strength, Meghan. That's avoidance. Meghan turned back, her eyes blazing. You want me to sit here and let you assassinate my character on live television? You want me to smile and nod while you minimize everything I went through? The audience was completely silent now, riveted by the confrontation. Producers were visible in the background, clearly panicking about how to handle this. Whoopi finally stood up too, facing Meghan directly across the table. I want you to have an actual conversation where you're not in complete control of the narrative. That's what real interviews are supposed to be, not the carefully managed sympathy tours you've been doing. Real questions, real pushback, real accountability. Meghan's hands were shaking now. Whether from anger or something else, it was impossible to tell. She pointed a finger at Whoopi, her voice trembling but fierce. Accountability. You want to talk about accountability? Let's talk about how the media created an entire industry out of tearing me down. Let's talk about the racist headlines, the doctored photos, the complete fabrications that were printed as fact. Where's the accountability for that? Where's the accountability for a family that threw me to the wolves to protect their own interests? Whoopi crossed her arms. I'm not the media, I'm not the tabloids, and I'm not your former family. I'm one person asking you direct questions. And the fact that you can't handle that without turning it into some grand conspiracy against you is exactly the problem. You're so wrapped up in being the wronged party that you can't see how you've contributed to the situation you're in. Meghan laughed, but it was a bitter sound. Contributed? I contributed by existing, by being a woman of color, walking into an institution built on exclusion and outdated tradition. That's my contribution. No, Whoopi shot back, her voice rising to match Meghan's energy. You contributed by making private family matters public. You contributed by doing tell-all interviews while simultaneously demanding privacy. You contributed by selling your story to the highest bidder while claiming you just wanted to be left alone. You can't have it both ways. You can't court the media when it serves you and then cry victim when they turn on you. That's not how this works. One of the other co-hosts finally managed to interject, her voice nervous. Maybe we should take a break. Let everyone cool down. Both Whoopi and Meghan ignored her completely. Meghan stepped closer to the table, her voice dropping to something almost dangerous. You have absolutely no idea what it's like to be gaslit by an entire institution. To have your reality questioned every single day. To be told that your pain isn't real, that you're being dramatic, that you're too sensitive, and now here you are, doing the exact same thing they did. Whoopi didn't back down an inch. I know exactly what it's like to be dismissed and underestimated. I've been fighting those battles since before you were born. The difference is, I didn't run to Oprah every time someone hurt my feelings. I didn't monetize my trauma and then act shocked when people questioned my motives. You want sympathy. Fine, you have mine for what you genuinely suffered. But you also need to own your choices. And right now, all you're doing is deflecting. The audience was shifting uncomfortably. Some people looked genuinely distressed by the confrontation. Others seemed unable to look away. Meghan's voice went quiet, which somehow made it more cutting. This is exactly why women don't speak up. This is exactly why victims stay silent. Because the moment you try to tell your truth, someone like you comes along and picks it apart, questions your credibility, suggests you're exaggerating or lying or attention-seeking. You're doing their work for them, Whoopi. You're silencing women just as effectively as any man ever could. Whoopi's expression hardened. Don't you dare try to make this about silencing women. I have spent my entire career amplifying women's voices, fighting for our right to be heard and believed. But believing women doesn't mean we turn off our critical thinking. It doesn't mean we accept every story without question. You can support someone and still ask them tough questions. You can believe they experience pain and still challenge inconsistencies in how they present that pain. Meghan's voice rose again. What inconsistencies? What are you even talking about? I've been consistent from the beginning about what happened to me. Whoopi ticked points off on her fingers. You said you wanted privacy, but you signed deals worth millions to talk about your private life. You said the family was concerned about your son's skin color, but you won't say who made the comment. You said you were suicidal, but you went to a public event that same evening, smiling for cameras. You said you felt trapped, but you had the resources to leave anytime you wanted. Those are inconsistencies, Meghan, whether you want to acknowledge them or not. Meghan's face was flushed red now. How dare you question whether my suicidal thoughts were real? How dare you sit there and act like you know what I was going through internally based on what cameras captured externally? Do you have any idea how disgusting that is? Whoopi's voice remained level, which seemed to make Meghan even angrier. I'm not questioning whether your pain was real. I'm questioning the timeline you've presented and the way you've chosen to discuss it publicly while maintaining that you value privacy. Those are two different things. I valued privacy before they made it impossible, Meghan snapped back. Before they turned my life into a tabloid circus, I had no choice but to speak out. Whoopi raised her eyebrows. No choice. You had every choice. You could have said nothing. Plenty of people in difficult situations choose dignity and silence. You chose the opposite. And that's fine, but don't pretend it wasn't a choice. Don't pretend you were forced into million-dollar interviews and Netflix deals. You wanted to tell your story. You wanted the platform. You wanted the control. Just be honest about that. Meghan was gripping the back of her chair now, knuckles white. You're twisting everything I'm saying. You're making it sound like I'm some calculated manipulator when I was just trying to survive. Whoopi shook her head. I'm not saying you're a manipulator. I'm saying you're human, which means you're complicated. You can be a victim of genuine mistreatment and still make choices that are self-serving. You can experience real pain and still leverage that pain for personal gain. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. But you want everyone to see you as purely a victim, purely wronged, with no agency or responsibility. And that's just not realistic. The other co-hosts were exchanging panicked glances. The show was clearly way off script, way past any point where they could rein it back in. Meghan's voice cracked slightly. I came here in good faith. I thought we could have a real conversation. Whoopi let out a short laugh. This is a real conversation. This is what happens when someone doesn't just nod along with your narrative. You're uncomfortable because, for once, you're not in complete control of how the story is being told. I'm uncomfortable because I'm being attacked on live television by someone who's supposed to understand what it's like to be targeted, Meghan countered. Whoopi's expression shifted, something harder entering her eyes. Attacked. I'm asking you questions. That's not an attack. If this feels like an attack, maybe that says something about how fragile your version of events really is. Meghan's mouth dropped open. Fragile. My version of events is fragile. I lived it, Whoopi. Every single moment of what I described, I lived through. You don't get to dismiss that. I'm not dismissing what you lived through, Whoopi said, her voice firm. I'm questioning how you're choosing to present it and profit from it. There's a difference. Meghan shook her head, looking like she might actually cry from frustration or anger or both. This is unbelievable. This is absolutely unbelievable. You've made up your mind about me based on tabloid narratives and media spin, and nothing I say is going to change that. Whoopi leaned forward, her hands flat on the table. I made up my mind based on watching your interviews, reading your words, and seeing the pattern of behavior. You play the victim, you refuse accountability. And anyone who questions you gets labeled as an enemy or a racist or whatever term shuts down the conversation fastest. That's your pattern, Meghan, and it's getting old. Meghan's voice went cold, each word deliberate and sharp. So now I'm playing the race card. Is that what you're suggesting? That when I call out actual racism, I'm just manipulating people? Whoopi didn't hesitate. I'm saying that racism is real. You may have experienced it, and you also use it strategically to deflect from legitimate criticism. Those can all be true at the same time. The moment anyone questions your actions or your choices, you pivot to race. You make it impossible to have a nuanced conversation because you weaponize the most serious accusations to shut people down. Meghan's breathing was visible now, her chest rising and falling rapidly. This is exactly what they did. This is the exact same gaslighting, the exact same dismissal. You're telling me that my experiences of racism weren't real, that I'm making it up for sympathy or attention? Do you hear yourself? Whoopi's jaw tightened. Stop putting words in my mouth. I said you may have experienced racism. I'm not denying that. What I'm saying is that you've also faced criticism for legitimate reasons that have nothing to do with race, and you conflate the two. Someone questions your business decisions. Racism. Someone points out contradictions in your interviews. Racism. Someone suggests you have agency and responsibility. Racism. It's intellectually dishonest. The audience was completely silent, the tension so thick you could almost see it. Meghan's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, which made it somehow more devastating. You have no idea what you're talking about. You have no idea what it was like to read headlines comparing me to an ape, to have commentators discuss whether my child would be too dark, to watch them praise another woman for doing the exact same things they crucified me for. And now, you sit here and tell me I'm being intellectually dishonest? You should be ashamed of yourself. Whoopi's expression didn't change. I am fully aware of the racist coverage you received, and I've condemned it publicly. That doesn't mean every criticism you've ever received is racist. That doesn't mean you get a free pass on everything because you've experienced discrimination. You're a grown woman who made choices, and some of those choices are worth examining. The fact that you can't separate legitimate critique from racism is part of the problem. Meghan slammed her hand on the table, the sharp sound making several audience members jump. There is no separating them when the criticism itself is rooted in racism. When the standards applied to me are different than the standards applied to others, that's racism. When I'm called difficult for the same behavior that makes men strong leaders, that's sexism and racism combined. You're asking me to pretend context doesn't matter, and I won't do that. Whoopi leaned back, her voice cooling slightly. Context absolutely matters, but so does honesty. You want everyone to consider the context of your actions, but you won't consider the context of how people are reacting to you. You've done multiple high-profile interviews where you made serious allegations without evidence. You've profited enormously from sharing your story while claiming you just wanted peace. You've maintained titles and status from an institution you claim is corrupt and racist. People aren't questioning you because of your race. They're questioning you because your actions don't match your words. Meghan's laugh was sharp and humorless. My actions don't match my words. I left. I walked away from everything. I gave up my life, my work, my home, everything I had built, because staying was destroying me. What more do you want? Whoopi raised her eyebrows. You didn't give up everything. You kept the titles. You kept the platform. You kept the fame. You just relocated it and rebranded it. Leaving doesn't mean you sacrificed everything when you turned that leaving into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Because I still had to live, Meghan shot back. I still had bills to pay, a child to raise, security to maintain. Was I supposed to just disappear into poverty to prove I was sincere? Whoopi shook her head. Nobody's saying you should have disappeared. But don't act like you're some struggling refugee when you've signed deals worth tens of millions. Don't act like you have no power or platform when you can command global media attention with a single interview. You have immense privilege even in your pain, and refusing to acknowledge that makes everything you say ring hollow. Meghan's eyes were bright with what might have been tears, though her voice remained strong. I acknowledge my privilege all the time. What I won't do is let that privilege be used as a weapon against me when I talk about my struggles. Rich people can be depressed. Famous people can be suicidal. Privileged people can still be victims of abuse and racism. My financial situation doesn't negate my pain. Whoopi nodded slowly. You're absolutely right about that. Privilege doesn't protect you from pain or discrimination, but it does give you options and resources that most people don't have. And when you're asking for public sympathy while exercising those options in ways that benefit you financially, people are going to question your motives. That's not unfair. That's human nature. So, I should have stayed silent, Meghan demanded. I should have just accepted the abuse, the lies, the racism, and said nothing because speaking out might be financially beneficial. That's what you're suggesting? Whoopi's voice went quiet but firm. I'm suggesting that you could have spoken out without making it a commercial venture. You could have told your story without signing exclusive deals and selling access. You could have sought justice through proper channels instead of trial by media. There were options between silence and what you chose. Meghan's voice cracked. The proper channels failed me. The institution failed me. The palace failed me. Where was I supposed to turn? Whoopi met her eyes directly. I don't know, Meghan. That's an honest answer. I don't know what I would have done in your exact position. But I do know that the path you chose, the public spectacle, the constant interviews, the documentaries, the books, it's not healing. It's not moving forward. It's staying stuck in your pain and inviting the world to stay stuck there with you. And at some point, you have to ask yourself if that's really serving you or if it's just keeping the wound open. The studio was absolutely silent. Meghan stood there, visibly shaking, tears now streaming down her face. You don't get to tell me how to heal. You don't get to decide what's best for me. I'm doing what I need to do to survive, to protect my family, to make sure my story is told accurately. If that makes me a villain in your eyes, fine. I can live with that. Whoopi's expression softened just slightly, though her voice remained steady. I don't think you're a villain. I think you're someone who's been hurt and is hurting others in response, maybe without even realizing it. I think you've built your entire identity around being wronged. And I worry about what happens when that's all you have left. Meghan wiped her eyes roughly, smearing her makeup. I'm done with this conversation. I'm done being judged by people who claim to support women, but only when those women behave exactly how they want them to. Whoopi stood fully now, her voice carrying across the studio. I do support women. I support their right to speak, to be heard, to be believed. But I also believe in holding people accountable, regardless of gender. You want unconditional support? Find your friends. You want respect? Earn it by being consistent, honest, and willing to engage with difficult questions without falling apart or claiming victimhood. Meghan grabbed her purse from beside her chair. This interview is over. Whoopi's voice followed her. Running away again? That seems to be your solution to everything. Meghan spun around one last time, her voice breaking. No. My solution is protecting myself from people who are determined to misunderstand me. There's a difference. And with that, she walked off the set, leaving Whoopi standing at the table. The audience in shocked silence, and the cameras still rolling. Whoopi looked directly into the camera, her expression unreadable. Well, she said quietly, I think that speaks for itself. We'll be right back after this break. But the show didn't go to break. The feed kept rolling for several more seconds, capturing Whoopi's face as she sat back down. The empty chair across from her, a stark reminder of the confrontation that had just exploded across live television. The other co-hosts sat frozen, clearly unsure how to proceed. And then, finally, the screen went black dot. So there you have it, one of the most explosive television moments in recent memory. A conversation that was supposed to bridge understanding instead became a battleground of perspectives, accountability, and pain. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and drop a comment below. Who do you think was right in this situation, Whoopi or Meghan? Let me know your thoughts.